I did some training at the Heights last week about these two things, and it just occurred to me that it might be something that's worth us rethinking about. I know I've explained these before, we've talked about them a lot, but our CPD has been taken over a bit by more of the operational. But rather than do anything new, I thought it would be a good idea for us to just go back to these and just double check that we haven't slipped into any bad habits when we're presenting work to students, that new members of the department also know what they are, just so we can think about these things and make sure they're in our lessons. And the two things I want to talk about are variation, where we're varying the way the questions are presented so they really, really think about what they're doing. They're not just following a pattern of steps. And interleaving, which I think is sometimes method selection. We did start making a lot of these interleaving worksheets quite well, but then I think it kind of stopped a little bit. So it's just worth me mentioning both of these. Interleaving links into retrieval, and I know we do that sometimes, but it's those SSD problems and things like that. You might see them called different things. Some people talk about interweaving. I don't really know how interweaving and interleaving are different. But so be aware of these words are out there. But however we choose to adapt the idea to our teaching and our classes is absolutely fine. Plan your lessons to get the students that are in front of you to think more, not just follow steps. Now I'm just going to go through a couple of examples of variation and not variation. There is no variation whatsoever in this exercise, so be cautious using Corbett maths. The term with the variable in always comes first, the term with the number in always comes second, and the answer is always third. It's not particularly a good way to present this kind of work to students. If at any point you want to look in more depth at any of the questions I show, please pause the video. I'm hopefully going to go quite fast, so pause if you want to look at questions in more depth. I've been using Maths Teacher Hub quite a lot, quite like Maths Teacher Hub, and actually in these ones there is variation. The variable term, the K, the U, the G, the W, they move around. It's not always the answer is the last thing, sometimes the answer comes first. So I quite like them, but when you look at the other two, well, there's no variation on them again. Not sure whether this is a particularly good exercise or whether they just get into the habit of take or add the second thing. I mean, look, they're all adds, they're all subtracts. I kind of get why they're like that, but it does tend to get the student to stop thinking. And we want them to think really carefully about what they're doing. Now, these have variation in them. This side is from, is from variationtheory.com. And I like it because the same numbers in there, but they've got to think differently about what they're doing with those different numbers. This side, I just made them up and I just moved the variables around. I put an inequality in there because why not? The instruction is to solve, so they still need to know how to solve an inequality, and it means solving inequalities doesn't become a separate thing. So this is an example of where you might have variation. Now this is something I've been doing with my year 9s, because what I've noticed is when they see algebra, they don't necessarily read the expand, simplify, substitute. They just kind of do whatever they think they should do. And doing this actually has really quite helped them realise the difference between the different things that they're supposed to do with algebra. Now, in some senses, it's an example of interleaving. Sometimes interleaving is giving the same picture and asking a different question. But I think this works for interleaving for me because I'm giving algebra in every one, but they are doing something different, even in the middle two, even though they're simplifying both of them. The skill is a different skill, and it just helps them with that method selection in their exams. So this is quite a nice thing for them to do as well. And an example of interleaving. And then one of the topics I had to talk about at the Heights was quadratics. And I realised with that one, it's much harder to do variation. Now, you could argue there's no variation in this one, but if you look at the first question, we would, years ago, typically only do question 2. We wouldn't give them one of the ones from question 1 and ask them to solve. But the recent GCSEs have done that, sometimes in a multiple choice, but they've mixed these two up. So as much as this isn't variation, I kind of think it is, and I do think you would separate these out, especially at the beginning of a topic. Students do need to think separately about these two types of things, but later on in the topic, they need to understand that both these questions are asking the same thing. One is just a step further ahead than the other. So really think about the stages in your teaching. Where are you putting these kind of things in? Here, Can you argue on the left-hand side, the 1 to 5, can we argue that 1 to 4 are variation because there's positives and negatives in there? Now, that wouldn't be the first exercise you give students if you're teaching solving quadratics, but it would be once you've taught it. If you were doing retrieval, you'd probably always mix up positives and negatives. Would you put something like number 5 in there as well, just to challenge them and remind them of that they have to have it equal to 0? And the same applies to the bit on the right. Now, they don't have to factorise on all of them. I think that's an exam question, but they can actually just balance again. So have you mixed them up? And then is that interleaving? That's the other argument. But do you mix these kind of things up so they're really thinking about those skills they need to solve quadratics? And this is an example why I think we've got to be careful using words, because the last one I said is almost interleaving. Here again, what I've got here is I think every one of them is a quadratic, but they're being asked to do different things. Students really struggle with this. Do they know whether they're using completing the square, factorising, or the quadratic formula? What skill are they using with this quadratic? So with year 11 at the minute, have you put something like this in? Because this is quite important that they recognise these different questions in the exam. I also wanted to remind you that we've got this SSDD that Craig Barton made. It's got hundreds of SSDs on there and they are really good. This one, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to try it with 8W5 because they've done area and perimeter. There's measuring in it as well. And it's just getting them used to all those different things that can be asked about one picture or one mathematical fact. I did a ratio one with year 11 that worked quite well as well. So don't forget that website is out there. And finally, these are the 3 websites that I would like you to try and look at and get into your teaching in the next couple of weeks. We've got SSDD, we've got Minimally Different, which is not Craig Barton, but is someone who was inspired by him. When I looked at them, some were good, some not so much. Some to me were just pattern spotting and the kids would find the pattern. So do look at these with that. You don't have to use everything in them. Some are good, some are not. And variationtheory.com as well, that's a good one. Might be .co.uk. I've just tried to go through a few different things about variation and interleaving or method selection. Just as a reminder, are you getting these things into your lesson? When we're busy and there's a lot to do, we often revert back to just get that Corbett sheet. In our lessons, are we managing to get these things in so the students are really thinking? Corbett is great, but we should be sort of snipping from here and there and thinking about how to get that variation in. Also depends on the stage of the topic that you're teaching. I hope that helps you. You are welcome to go away and plan. Please, your planning now is focused on getting some of this stuff and making sure it's in your lessons. Thank you.